Welcome to The Music Reel. I'm your host, Nicola Burton, and today I have the pleasure of speaking to Samantha Morris. Now, Samantha is an award-winning community engagement specialist working in arts and culture, and she is one of Australia's most proactive music industry champions. Samantha is the co-founder and the director of the Gold Coast independent street magazine called Blank Gold Coast, and she is the founder of the Gold Coast Music Awards. Samantha, thank you for taking the time to speak to me today.
G'day, and thanks for having me.
It's good to meet you finally. I believe you had a bit of an interesting experience in lockdown by hosting music awards in April. What was that like?
We did. Well, this 2020 was going to be our fourth year closing down the main street of Surfers Paradise and building a huge festival-sized stage on the beach. And 4 weeks before that was due to happen, of course, some serious restrictions were put in place across the whole of Australia. So we had to modify those plans rather drastically. And instead, we delivered a virtual awards presentation by packaging together a video reel of the announcements. But there were some really unique challenges. We couldn't, let the winners know beforehand that they had won. So there was no way for winners to do acceptance speeches. There was no way to deliver winners their trophies. We couldn't have the huge bands that we wanted to have on the stage because, as you know, lots of band members don't live in the same house, so they couldn't even get together for a performance. So we pivoted really quickly. And then, of course, the other challenge was we had to use this technology that we'd never used before. And I think lots of people in the music industry are experiencing that. On the one hand, we have lots of musicians who use cutting edge technology. And on the other hand, we have music administrators like you, me, who perhaps aren't as up to date with some of the technology we should be. So it was a really big learning experience. But we went from having 400 paying guests in a marquee on the beach, who would normally witness and participate in the awards, to having 21,000 people across Australia watch the award ceremony. So in terms of the outcomes for Gold Coast music, it was massive.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
21,000. Yeah. So do you think moving forward into the future, you might perhaps use some of this technology again?
Unfortunately for me, I feel like we don't have a choice but to really invest in making sure that we have a live stream that is professionally produced and, with great audio and great sound. And there's obviously challenges in doing that in a live event setting. We're not really a music gig where you can just put one camera, the sound desk, and record great video. It's a live awards ceremony, and there's lots of moving parts to that. But yeah, because of the outcomes this year, we really have no choice but to continue to do that. The goal of the Music Awards was always about putting Gold Coast artists in the national mind, in the mind of national bookers and promoters and stuff like that. And look, some of those 21,000 people were probably other event organisers across the music industry. We were one of the first industry events to happen. And they were probably curious watching on, but I don't care why they were watching. They watched, and that was a really good outcome for Gold Coast musicians. Yeah,
100%. You set the bar so high, Samantha. So congratulations, well done.
Thank you. Thanks. We had no idea what we were doing.
No one has. We're all making it up as we go along.
Yeah, damn straight.
So we're in August. It all happened in March. I'm not sure what it's like on the Gold Coast. In Brisbane, we're still a bit of a twilight zone. No one's really sure. So I guess take me through what's going on right now in cultural businesses on the Gold Coast in terms of recovery, especially now that our borders have closed. It's going to impact tourism. So what's your take on what's going on right now?
I think, and this is the case for any business, cultural or not, one of the biggest barriers to success is uncertainty. And when you have uncertainty in any operation, it makes decision-making really hard. It makes decision-making hard. It makes investment and allocating resources hard. It makes motivating staff really hard. And obviously it has an impact on the goals that you're achieving as well. So what I'm seeing here on the Gold Coast and further afield is just people stuck in this limbo. We have venues who went ahead and booked, of course, all Australian artists who have booked artists in months ahead. And some of them have had to rush musicians across the border actually today. They have gigs over the next 2 weeks, so it makes sense to rush them over the border, they can do private functions and media and not be in quarantine and then still perform those gigs. And if they, obviously there's an expense to doing that, you know, you have to pay for these artists' time, for their accommodation, you have to be really organised to make sure that you're capitalising on them being in town earlier. Obviously they have other dates in Queensland as well, but the way East Coast tours run is that usually artists start on the Gold Coast and make their way north. So, you know, they've got those challenges. They're already operating under very limited numbers. And of course it's the Gold Coast, so there's always challenges in getting people to go to gigs anyway. However, all of the first cabs off the rank have been sold out pretty much. So we have, you know, those mid-career kind of artists here on the Gold Coast who have been putting on shows and launching albums and selling out not one night but 2 or 3 or 4 nights, because that's the only way they can, you know, recoup the costs of doing it.
How good is that?
It's awesome, you know, but these are venues that now have limited capacity of 60 or 100 people. So they're still small numbers, yeah.
And when you think about it, so the Gold Coast in the 70s and 80s and 90s, that was the place to gig, right? That was massive.
Oh, you know, yeah.
And you know what's going on now, and you just, I just want to cry when I think about the promoters and the venues who have supported live music. Without them, there are no gigs. And what they're going through right now, don't you just feel for them?
It's actually, to be honest, I mean, I like to be quite optimistic about the future and opportunities available, but it's really hard, and this comes back to the uncertainty thing, it's really hard to see a clear path out of this when you consider that there might be a music venue paying $5,000 a month for rent, and you consider the volume of tickets or alcohol or events that they have to run just to pay their rent, and that's before any staff get paid. I mean, there aren't many businesses that are stuck in this kind of situation right now. And then the whole way that the music industry is doing business has changed, from people working at home, like we both are, through to not being able to book international gigs, not knowing, you know, the Gold Coast is basically the entertainment hub of Australia. I didn't say live music, I said entertainment, because we have a lot of conventions, we have a lot of huge hotels, we have a lot of nightclubs, we have a lot of outdoor events because of our climate, and live music plays a really huge part of that. It's not the only part. And so once you start to shut down conventions and you start to shut down the tourism industry, there are probably more paid professional musicians on the Gold Coast than any city in Australia because of that entertainment industry, and it's having a huge impact on how the whole city functions, really. And those free events that we put on every year, Bleach Festival, Blues on Broadbeach, Groundwater, which is now one of the biggest country music events in the world, they don't know if they can book international artists. They don't know if they can book artists from Byron Bay, which is only 20 minutes from our border. I mean, the uncertainty is overwhelming. Yeah.
It is, and you've got schoolies looming, and they're not even sure if that's going to happen this year as well. I mean, none of us thought New Year's Eve 2019, right, what's it going to be in 2020? And it's sort of taken us all by surprise. But one person I was speaking to last week said, you know, for us to be able to move forward, we've got to understand where we've come from. And the city of Gold Coast has been heavily invested in live music for the last few decades. They've been incredible. And now they've got the Cultural Strategy 2023. So I guess I wanted to bring up a little bit, I guess, my history as a performer. I worked a little bit with Graham Hutchinson years ago. I think I've set the record of being the only person whose water's broken. I went into labour in his offices in Fisherman's Wharf. Sorry, Graham. But look, love him or hate him, he created these events and publicity mechanisms that helped so many of the venues actually be successful in those times. And I believe you're writing a book.
I am.
Paradise. So I'm really curious to hear about this book. Tell me about why you decided to write it and what kind of things you're actually going to be talking about.
So, well, I just want to acknowledge City of Gold Coast here too, because they've actually provided a grant to me and my co-author to write this book, which will focus on the live music scene here in the city in the 70s, 80s and 90s, which really was the musical heyday for the Gold Coast and the whole of Australia. We're interviewing a bunch of high-profile artists as well as lots of people who were involved in gigs at that time. And the thing that was really curious about particularly the 70s and 80s was the fact that a band could leave one of the southern cities or regional towns and tour up the East Coast, including the Gold Coast, and basically have a gig every night. And I don't mean a pub gig where the Pokies and Keno are on, because we didn't have either then, where you're shoved in a corner under fluorescent lights trying to make the best of a bad situation. I'm talking sweaty pub gigs with hundreds and hundreds of people who'd paid a ticket to come. And a lot of things happened in the 80s and 90s which really changed the culture of live music. So many things have contributed to the change of the live music landscape. There were new fire regulations in New South Wales. There were liquor licensing. We didn't have drink driving laws in the 1980s. So we had the introduction of random breath testing. We had, what else did we have? The rise of big festivals, Big Day Out and what have you, coming onto the landscape in the early 90s. We had the advent of mobile phones and digital technology, and all of those things have significantly contributed to live music. I experienced this era myself because I went to high school and university on the Gold Coast and went to a lot of these venues. And I feel like a lot of people my age actually romanticised that era, and rightly so, but it wasn't all good. There was a lot of underage drinking. There were a lot of young girls. I started going to these clubs when I was 14, music venues when I was 14. There are a lot of young girls exposed to things that perhaps wouldn't be so considered appropriate now, and certainly aren't. And there was also a lot of corruption happening in Queensland. So, you know, all of these things fed a system that was fabulous for live music fans, but there's a lot of other stories that need to be told there. So yeah, we're actually interviewing Graham Hutchinson about his memories of that era. And but as you said, knowing where we've come from is actually a really good strategy for helping us navigate where we need to go now. Yeah. The one thing that a lot of those venues did was they really created a sense of community. So people talk so fondly about the Playroom, and they think that they're remembering these amazing gigs, and certainly they are. But what they're actually remembering is this sense of community that existed around these places. They became community hubs. You didn't have text messaging to text your mate and say, are we still on for dollar drinks at the Playroom this Thursday? You just went because that was what happened. Mm-hmm. And people talk about the lack of public transport and things like that impact going to live music now. But I don't know if you're familiar with the Gold Coast. I lived in Ashmore, which was definitely the burbs, miles away from the beach. Yep. And I never had a problem getting to the Playroom, which was, you know, basically in the 30s, you would have had to get on a pony and ride for a whole day. So, you know, you find a way when you have that sense of belonging, and that's, in a way, is what people are missing now when it comes to venues.
And we had that hunger as well, didn't we? I mean, cover bands were huge. They were just as big as touring bands. And
totally.
We just had this appetite. We had to go to these gigs. You're right. It was community. And I think that, you know, as you say, that is going to be how we recover, is rebuilding these little community pods. And it might be more local.
Yeah.
Instead of, you know, having everyone coming from everywhere, we start small. Maybe that's how we do it.
And I'm actually a social scientist, and one of the things I've observed in a bunch of communities, because I also work quite a bit in Western Queensland, is that a lot of the businesses that are navigating their way through this are the businesses that have really invested in their staff, their organisational culture, how they interact with people that are in a close geographical proximity. And that includes venues. So as one example, we have lots of examples on the Gold Coast. Miami Marquetta have a really dedicated fan base. They love Miami Marquetta. So as soon as Miami Marquetta relaunched, and they actually relaunched with a drive-through food market, you know, really innovative stuff. They had gin boxes. So they had all of this alcohol that they needed to use in their space. So they created these little, come and pick up your cocktail box for Friday night. And they were heaps more expensive than what you would pay for booze from a bottle shop. But people didn't care because they loved Miami Marquetta and wanted to support it. And Moe's Desert Clubhouse have done the same. You know, they've really fostered this sense of community. Vinnie's have also done the same.